Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. In today's video, I will be mentioning another proof for the truth of Islam and making an argument for the truth of Islam. I think this is one of the strongest and probably the strongest proof for the truth of Islam, namely the Quran challenge. Let's get started. So, first I'll just read the ayat where the challenge is made and then I'll explain it. This is Surah Baqarah ayat 23. And if you are in doubt about we have sent down upon our servant Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then produce a surah the like thereof and call upon your witnesses other than Allah if you should be truthful. Now, basically the kuffar try to dismiss this as being a subjective challenge. It's not. It's actually an objective challenge and it can be analyzed, and there are objective reasons, there are objective criteria. There is an objective criteria for meeting this challenge, and that challenge hasn't been successful. So I'll just explain the argument and the objective criteria involved here. There are about 16 types of Arabic poetry and there are 2 types of prose. All Arabic works pre-Islam, post-Islam and during the revelation of Islam fit into one of these 18 categories. The Quran does not fit into any of these categories. The Quran lays out a challenge for anyone to produce one surah like it in the same form as the Quran. One surah has only a minimum of 3 lines. 1400 years have passed and no one has been able to meet this challenge. How is this possible if the Quran is man-made? All human art can be imitated. All human speech, paintings, etc., any form of art can be imitated. Why is it that the Quran in 1400 years ago hasn't been imitated? Why is it that no one has produced one surah, 3 lines, 10 words basically, in the same literary form as the Quran? This is highly unlikely if the Quran has been made up by someone human, but it is best explained. In fact, I think it's only explained by Quran being a revelation from God. Now, by the way, the Arabs at the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ were at the peak of Arabic language and linguistics, and no one disputes this point. These people were the best placed to challenge the Quran challenge, yet they failed at it, and it is extremely unlikely anyone will ever succeed at this. And I'll give the proof very soon why they failed at it. Now, the Quran was revealed in a time when the Arabs were pagans, whose entire economy was based on idol worship, right? People used to do pilgrimage to Mecca, which was the center of idol worship at that time. Their entire economy was based on idol worship. Quran challenged that. Moreover, Quran challenged the entire fabric of their society. They had ample motivation to meet the challenge of the Quran for these reasons, yet they were unable to. How do we know they failed to meet the Quran challenge? Because Islam spread so rapidly among the Arabs who were expert linguistics. Think about this. If Quran challenge had failed then, right? If the Quran challenge had been met, Islam would have never spread among Arabs, whose entire fabric of society was being challenged by the Quran. If the Quran challenge has failed, right? What motivations do the Arabs have to follow something that goes against everything they believe and that has been proven to be false? They wouldn't. Hence, they wouldn't have followed the Quran if the Quran challenge has failed. And since they did follow the Quran in massive numbers, we know that the Quran challenge has never been failed and the challenge still stands. Now, basically to prove this point that the Quran challenge hasn't been met, I'll be quoting non-Muslim scholars so someone cannot claim bias. First, I'll give a reference for basically the Arabs at the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ being expert linguists. This is from Naveed Kirmani. He's actually an Orientalist, a German Orientalist. I'll just read the reference. Old Arabic poetry is a highly complex phenomenon The vocabulary, grammatical idiosyncrasies, and strict norms were passed down from generation to generation, and only the most gifted students fully mastered the language. A person has to study for years, sometimes even decades, under a master poet before laying claim to the title of poet. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ grew up in a world which almost religiously revered poetic expression. So, this reference is enough to prove that the Arabs at the time were experts, right? Linguistic experts. Now I'll give references from Orientalists who will admit the Quran challenge hasn't been met. First one is from Karen Armstrong. It is as though Muhammad ﷺ had created an. Of course, she thinks that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is author of the Quran. Of course, that's not the case, but I'll just read the reference now. It is as though Muhammad ﷺ had created an entirely new literary form that some people were not ready for, but which thrilled others. Without this experience of the Quran, it is extremely unlikely that Islam would have taken root. So, this is first reference regarding the Quran being in a unique literary form. The second reference is from Angelica Neuwirth. By the way, I think with the exception of this reference, the reference from Angelica Neuwirth, everything else has been taken from an article that I'll link in the video description. This is from the Sapiens Institute website. An interview with Angelica Neuwirth, who is a professor of Quranic studies, argued that the Quran has never been successfully challenged by anyone past or present. Here is the scholar's words. No one has succeeded. This is right. I really think that the Quran has even brought Western researchers embarrassment who weren't able to clarify how suddenly in an environment where there were not any appreciable written text appeared the Quran with its richness of ideas and its magnificent wordings. By the way, if you want a copy of this recording, it is the Sapiens Institute has this, so you can contact them for that. The third reference is from Professor Hamilton Gibb, who states that if the Quran were his, Muhammad Wasallam's own composition, other men could rival it. Let them produce 10 verses like it. If they could not, and it is obvious that they could not, then let them accept the Quran as an outstanding evidential miracle. The fourth reference is a really long one. This is from Naveed Karmani again. Again, he read this. Pause the video and read this. He's saying the same point that the Quran is in a unique literary form that is different from poetry and different from prose. It is unique, inimitable. Fifth reference is from Bruce Lawrence, and again he'll make the same point that the Quran is not poetry or prose. Those passages from the Quran that approach such, which is I think prose, still elude or procrastinate efforts to reduce them to an alternate form of such. So Quran is not such. It's not poetry, it's not such, it is a completely unique literary form. The last reference I'll quote is from basically 4 Orientalists from the book Arabic Literature to the End of Umayyad Period. The Quran is not verse, meaning poetry, but it is rhythmic. The rhythm of some verses resemble the regularity of such, but it was recognized by the Quraysh critics to belong to neither one nor the other category. So we have even more Orientalists agreeing with the fact that the Quran is inimitable and that it is a unique category of its own. Now, there are some contentions to this challenge, and I will spend time only on 2 of these. Others have been, I think, refuted thoroughly by now. First contention is that Al-Mutanabi, who was a major Arabic poet, is also considered to be inimitable. I think Hamza Zotzis gives references for this in his recent video on Sapiens Institute, but I think this is also in the 13th chapter on the divine reality. Al-Mutanabi is not in a unique literary form. His work is in the same literary form as the previous all the other Arabic works. As for Shakespeare, again, some people try to claim that it's also beautiful, so it's also from God by that perspective. Again, the Quran challenge is not about aesthetic beauty or subjective beauty, although Quran is beautiful, there is no doubt about that. But the Quran challenge isn't about subjective beauty, it is about a unique literary form. And Shakespeare is certainly not in a unique literary form. The other playwrights of the time wrote in the, I think the same, some of them wrote in the same form as the Shakespeare. I think it's called the iambic pentameter. and this is also mentioned in the 13th chapter of the book Divine Reality, so I don't want to go into this. There are two other contentions that are extremely important, and actually they show the desperation of the kuffar here. For one thing, the kuffar will try to do, and generally is say that there is some sort of conspiracy theory that the that the Quran challenge was met, but that challenge was removed or removed from history, or that Muslims did not preserve it. Firstly, conspiracy theories like this are beyond unlikely. Why? Because Islamic historical records are preserved. I made numerous videos on this arguments for hadith preservation to prove this point. Our records are preserved, so the conspiracy theory thing is highly unlikely. Secondly, if the Quran challenge would have been met sometime, right, then the Arabs would not have accepted Islam in such massive numbers as they did. I argued for this earlier as well. There is a fourth point that is usually brought up. The contention is this that the criteria for the Quran challenge, namely, it is not one of the 16 types of poetry or one of the two types of prose, right? This criteria is not mentioned explicitly in the Quran or in the Ahadith. This is something that is derived with by scholars. The contention is that it shouldn't be like this. The criteria should have been mentioned directly in the Quran or Ahadith. Okay, here's a simple response to this contention. Why? Why does the specific criteria need to be mentioned in the Quran or Ahadith? Why can't it be derived by scholars? This is nothing but a subjective value judgment, and subjective value judgments are worthless. Why do you think the kuffar are trying to argue that the Quran challenge is subjective? Because subjective value judgments don't count, right? Since this contention is based on a subjective value judgment, it doesn't count either. Of course, we can prove the Quran challenge is objective, and Orientalists and Kuffar cannot prove that this contention is objective. It's not just subjective. So the contentions against the Quran challenge fail. Inshallah, I hope you have enjoyed this video. I think I'll make a second video on this topic as well. Firstly, I just wanted to make this video on the basically the objective part, or the part about the types of poetry and types of prose, and the Quran challenge not being met, references from Orientalists. I think that needed one video on its own, which I think this video is sufficient for. Inshallah, I'll soon make another video how the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam being unlettered, right, and how the way the Quran was revealed also proves the truth of Islam. Inshallah, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Till next time, Assalamu alaikum.